Welcome back to Peptides and Performance. If you've spent any time researching peptides for longevity and cellular health, you've probably encountered two names that sound almost identical, Epitalon and Epithalon. And if you've tried to figure out which one is which, you've likely hit a wall of conflicting information, misspellings, and outdated research citations. Today, we're going to cut through that confusion. We're going to explain exactly why these naming inconsistencies exist, what the actual research distinguishes between them, and how to interpret the science so you can make informed decisions about your own research and education. Before we dive in, I want to be clear. Everything we discuss today is educational and research focused. We're not providing medical advice, treatment recommendations, or personal dosing guidance. If you're considering any peptide-based protocol, that conversation belongs with a qualified healthcare provider. What we're doing here is breaking down the peer-reviewed literature and helping you understand the landscape. Let's start with the core issue. Epitalon and Epithalon are not two different peptides. They are the same peptide sequence, a tetrapeptide called alaglu-asp-gly, or alanine glutamic acid aspartic acid glycine. The naming confusion stems from transliteration differences between Russian scientific literature and English language research databases. Epitalon is the more commonly used English transliteration of the Russian name Epitalon. Epithalon is an alternative transliteration that appears in some older publications and certain research supply catalogs. Both refer to the identical 4-amino acid sequence. It's similar to how you might see bifidobacterium spelled slightly differently across regional scientific journals. The organism is the same, but the transliteration varies. Now, why does this matter beyond just semantics? Because when you're searching the literature, you need to know both spellings to find all the relevant research. If you only search for Epitalon, you'll miss studies published under Epithalon, and in a field where the research base is relatively modest compared to larger pharmaceutical areas. Missing even a few studies can leave significant gaps in your understanding. The peptide itself was first synthesized and characterized in the 1980s by Russian researchers, particularly through the work at the Russian Academy of Sciences. This is why the original literature is predominantly in Russian, and why transliteration became necessary when these findings entered English language databases like PubMed. So what does the research actually explore regarding this peptide's mechanism? The primary focus in the literature has been on telomerase activity and telomere length maintenance. Telomeres are the protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes. They naturally shorten with each cell division. This is called the Hayflick limit in cellular biology. Research has explored whether this tetrapeptide might support telomerase expression, which is the enzyme responsible for telomere maintenance. Specifically, in vitro studies and animal model research have suggested that this peptide may activate telomerase in certain cell types. Some research has explored its potential role in supporting immune function, particularly in aging models. Other studies have examined whether it might support pineal gland function and melatonin production, a mechanism that's been of particular interest in longevity research. But here's what's critical to understand. Most of this research has been conducted in cell cultures or animal models. Human clinical trial data is limited. When you see claims about telomere lengthening or dramatic lifespan extension in humans, you're typically looking at extrapolations from preclinical research, not direct human evidence. This is an important distinction that separates rigorous science communication from marketing hype. The research that does exist in humans is primarily observational or small scale. For example, some studies have tracked telomere length changes in individuals using this peptide, but these lack the control groups and blinding that would make them definitive clinical evidence. This doesn't mean the research is worthless. It means we should interpret it with appropriate caution and recognize the limitations. Now let's talk about how this peptide fits into the broader peptide landscape you might be researching. If you're familiar with peptides like BPC-157 or TB500, you know that different peptides have different mechanisms and different evidence bases. BPC-157, for instance, has more robust human data around GI healing and injury recovery. TB500 has been explored primarily in animal models for tissue repair and inflammation. Epitalon, or Epithalon, occupies a different niche. It's positioned in the cellular senescence and longevity space, rather than the acute healing space. The mechanism is about supporting cellular maintenance at the telomere level, not about acute tissue repair. This is an important distinction because it changes how you think about timing, duration, and expected outcomes of any research protocol. The dosing and administration protocols you'll see discussed in the literature vary considerably. Some research protocols use subcutaneous administration, others intranasal. Dosages in animal studies range widely, from low nanomolar concentrations in cell culture to milligram per kilogram ranges in animal models. This variability is another reason why personal dosing guidance should always come from a healthcare provider familiar with peptide research, not from general educational content. One practical point for your research: when you're evaluating sources discussing this peptide, check whether they're using consistent terminology. If a source switches between Epitalon and Epithalon without acknowledging they're the same compound, that's a red flag for either poor research practices or an attempt to make it sound like there are multiple options when there's really just one. Good science communication is precise about these distinctions. You'll also encounter claims about this peptide being a fountain of youth or a telomerase activator without qualification. The research-accurate framing is: research has explored whether this tetrapeptide may support telomerase expression in certain contexts. That's a much narrower claim than the marketing language you'll often see. Learning to spot this difference between research frame language and marketing language is one of the most valuable skills in evaluating peptide information. Let's also address the regulatory landscape briefly. This peptide is not approved by the FDA for any therapeutic use in the United States. It's available through research supply channels and some international sources, but it exists in a gray area legally. This is true for many peptides. They're available for research purposes, but their legal status for personal use is ambiguous. This is another conversation to have with a healthcare provider in your jurisdiction. The bottom line on the naming confusion: Epitalon and Epithalon are the same peptide, just transliterated differently from Russian research. When you're doing your own research, search for both terms to ensure you're finding all available literature. When you're evaluating claims about what this peptide does, look for research frame language that acknowledges the difference between preclinical findings and human clinical evidence. The peptide research space is evolving rapidly, and naming inconsistencies are just one of many challenges in staying informed. The best approach is to develop literacy in how to read and interpret the primary literature. Understand the difference between in vitro, animal model, and human clinical evidence, and maintain healthy skepticism about extraordinary claims. If you're interested in deepening your understanding of peptides, not just Epitalon, but the broader landscape of peptide research, mechanisms, and evidence bases, we've created a comprehensive free peptide guide that breaks down the major peptides being researched, their proposed mechanisms, the current evidence status, and practical frameworks for evaluating peptide information. You can download that guide at performancepeptides.io. It's designed specifically for people who want to move beyond marketing hype and actually understand the science. We also have detailed breakdowns of BPC127, TB500, and other peptides in the research space, all framed with the same commitment to accuracy and evidence-based language. Remember, this content is educational only. It's not medical advice, and it's not a substitute for consultation with a qualified healthcare provider. If you're considering any peptide-based protocol, that decision should be made in partnership with a medical professional who understands your individual health context and can provide appropriate guidance. Thanks for watching Peptides and Performance. If this kind of detailed, research-focused breakdown of the peptide landscape is valuable to you, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We're publishing deep dives into peptide mechanisms, evidence reviews, and clarity on the confusing corners of this space every week. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and always prioritize evidence over hype.